A 6-year-old German shepherd, left to suffer in silence, his legs bound tight with rusted wire. And then, out of nowhere, a 4-year-old girl in a muddy pink dress appeared. What she did next? It didn't just save his life. It awakened a truth her whole town had forgotten. This story will break your heart, and then remind you what grace really looks like. Like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. You won't believe how it ends. The sky over Salem, Oregon, held that gentle silver hue of early spring, clouds thin as gauze drifting across the sun. It was a Tuesday, warm enough to leave jackets indoors, but crisp enough that the pine-scented breeze carried a chill. The Carter family's backyard backed directly into a swath of tall Douglas firs, a natural border where manicured lawn gave way to untamed forest. In that quiet hour before lunch, the only sound was the wind combing through trees and the occasional chirp of jays. Rosie Carter, 4 years old, wandered barefoot on the damp grass, clutching a crumpled paper cup full of tiny white daisies. She wore a pink cotton dress printed with strawberries, slightly stained with applesauce from breakfast, and a plastic tiara that had lost one jewel. Rosie was small for her age, with chestnut curls tied into uneven pigtails and cheeks perpetually smudged with adventure. She was the kind of child who believed dandelions made wishes come true, and that the rustling of leaves might be the whispers of fairies. Today she was looking for violets. Inside the house, her mother, Sarah Carter, moved with practiced speed between kitchen and dining room. Sarah was 36, slender, tall, with a dancer's posture and dark circles under her eyes. Her long blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and she wore jeans and an old university sweatshirt flecked with flour. Once warm and whimsical, Sarah's personality had become taut with time, after a miscarriage 2 years ago and a stressful return to work as a part-time nurse. The party preparations for Evan's 14th birthday were her distraction, her armor. Her husband, Mark Carter, a soft-spoken man in his 40s with glasses and a growing bald spot, was outside in the front yard wrestling with a folding canopy. Mark had a calm, slow way of speaking, and often let Sarah lead the rhythm of their household. Inside, Evan, their teenage son, hunched over his phone in the den, half watching sports highlights while ignoring Sarah's calls to help carry decorations. None of them noticed Rosie slip past the back gate. She hummed as she followed the edge of the lawn, pushing aside ferns with the same curiosity she used to examine snails. The woods weren't deep, just a narrow belt of trees before the land opened up again, but for Rosie, it felt like a world of its own. There, under the pine shadows, every step was a new secret. That's when she heard it. A sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a sob. Faint. Ragged. She froze. The noise came again. A strained whimper, like something in pain, carried by the wind. Rosie clutched her cup of daisies to her chest. She tilted her head, listening with the quiet seriousness only children possess. "Hello?" she called, her voice feather-light in the stillness. The sound responded, a muffled broken whine. She turned toward it instinctively, stepping onto the mulch-covered floor of the forest, the soles of her feet cool against the needles. The trail led past a moss-covered log she had once named the Dragon Tail, behind which Rosie and Evan used to play pirate ship. She ducked beneath a low branch, her curls catching on pine needles, and there, tucked in a dip of tangled bramble, she saw it. At first, all she saw were eyes, golden brown, wide, and glassy with fear. A German shepherd lay crumpled in the underbrush, half covered in mud. Its coat, once likely sleek black and tan, was matted with filth and smeared with something dark that made Rosie's stomach twist. But what stole her breath were the metal wires wrapped tight around its legs, twisted like cruel vines, cutting deep into raw, red flesh. Rosie didn't scream. She stood, still as the trees, and stared. The dog didn't move, didn't growl. It just looked at her. In that gaze, Rosie saw not only pain, but something else. Something like waiting. Her mother had warned her about strange dogs. "They might be scared," Sarah had said once after a neighborhood pit bull barked at Rosie, "and scared dogs can bite." But this dog didn't look angry. It looked broken. Rosie dropped to her knees slowly, inching forward on the damp soil. "It's okay," she whispered, the way Sarah whispered when Rosie woke from nightmares. "I'm Rosie." The German shepherd flinched as she crawled closer, but didn't growl. Its breath came in shallow pants. Its paws twitched weakly against the wire. "I won't hurt you," Rosie added, voice trembling. She reached out, hesitating. The dog's eyes never left hers. And then, as if sensing something in her, it let out a sigh, a soft, aching sound, and rested its head on the ground. Rosie touched its fur, rough, wet, cold. She leaned closer and saw the metal was rusty. The wire hadn't wrapped accidentally. It had been twisted, pulled. There were marks near the neck, too, as if a collar had been yanked off. She pulled her hand back and looked around, as if expecting someone to step out from the trees. But they were alone. "I'll come back," she said suddenly. "I'll get you help. Just wait, okay?" The dog made a low noise, barely audible, and she stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. Her crown slipped sideways, nearly falling, but she didn't notice. Rosie ran, past the dragon tail, past the back gate, across the yard. She burst through the sliding glass door into the kitchen, where Sarah was balancing a tray of cupcakes. Icing splattered on the floor. "Rosie, careful! Mommy, there's a dog in the woods. He's hurt. He's bleeding." Sarah blinked. "Sweetie, what are you talking about? He's all tied up and he's sad and he needs help. Real help." Sarah wiped her hands. "Rosie, I told you to stay near the house. And didn't you say a dragon lived behind that log last week?" "No, not now. It's real." Sarah knelt, brushing hair from Rosie's damp forehead. "Honey, I'm sure whatever you saw—" "I touched him!" Rosie wailed. "He looked at me!" From the hallway, Evan groaned. "She's doing that thing again, Mom." "I'm not," Rosie stomped her tiny foot. "He's real." Sarah sighed. "The cupcake's now forgotten. Rosie, go wash your hands. And no more woods today, all right?" "But, Rosie..." The girl stared at her mother for a moment longer, then looked down. Nobody believed her. She turned and trudged upstairs, tiny fists balled. But in her chest, something new had bloomed. Not fear, not frustration, a decision. If no one would help the dog, she would. The quiet in Salem that night was not the kind that lulled. It buzzed softly, thick with the scent of wet bark and distant rain. By midnight, the Carter house was silent. Upstairs, a string of paper stars still swayed above the unused party table in Evan's room, a birthday that had passed with more stress than smiles. Rosie's tiny bed, blanketed in unicorns, looked untouched. A small window was slightly ajar, the curtain flitting with the breeze. Outside, the backyard lay hushed, dimly lit by the moon, the forest beyond cast in shadow. Rosie Carter, 4 years old, crouched behind the hedges with a small zippered lunch bag clutched to her chest. Her pink dress from earlier that day was now smudged with soil. Her plastic tiara had been left behind, replaced by a blue flashlight clenched between her teeth. Inside the bag were 2 slightly stale graham crackers, a juice box, and her purple safety scissors. Dull, blunt-edged, with a missing screw but still her most prized possession. She had waited until Sarah's footsteps stopped creaking overhead and Evan's bedroom light clicked off. She had listened to the ticking of the kitchen clock and counted to 200 before slipping out the window, just like Evan had once shown her when sneaking snacks during a storm. Now, each barefoot step across the cold lawn felt like thunder to her tiny body. But she kept moving toward the woods. The air between the trees was colder. Needles clung to her hair. Her flashlight beam bounced ahead in shaky circles. Rosie didn't hum this time. She didn't whisper to the ferns or the bugs. She just walked, the way only someone very brave or very scared might do. She found him in the same place. The German shepherd was still curled in the underbrush, his fur tangled with dried blood and forest debris. His body was tense, his breathing shallow, but his eyes lifted the moment she appeared. They gleamed in the moonlight, not threatening, not wild, just tired. "Hi again," she whispered, kneeling beside him. Her flashlight beam fell on the wire twisted around his front legs, tight and ugly. "I brought you snacks," she added, pulling the crackers from the bag. The dog didn't move. Rosie broke a cracker in half, laid it in front of him, and took a sip from the juice box before offering it to him, like she'd seen her mom offer tea to guests. "It's grape," she said. The shepherd hesitated, then, with effort, nudged his nose toward the straw. He licked once, twice, awkward and slow, but drank. Rosie's face lit up. "You're a good dog." The dog let out a low sound, not quite a whine, almost like a sigh. Rosie reached carefully into her bag, retrieved the scissors, and set the flashlight between her knees, angling it toward the dog's legs. "I have to cut the mean wires now. It might hurt." Her small fingers trembled as she leaned in. The first snip did nothing. The blades were too dull. She tried again, putting all her weight into the squeeze. A scraping sound, a flinch from the dog, and finally, click. One of the outer wires gave way. "I'm sorry," she whispered as the shepherd let out a muffled yelp. He didn't pull back. Instead, he licked her wrist, his tongue dry and warm. She kept going. Piece by piece, wire by wire, Rosie clipped and pulled. Her knees ached. A bramble scraped her shin. Her hands turned red from effort, the scissors pinching her fingers. Once the metal slipped on and caught her skin. She hissed and bit her lip, but didn't cry. Not out loud. Across the fence line, about 3 houses down, a porch light blinked on. Rosie froze. The dog stilled too. For a long moment, all was silence. Then, a door creaked open. A dog barked, someone else's. Rosie ducked low, heart hammering. The flashlight beam danced wildly across the trees, but no one came. Eventually, the porch light blinked off. She let out a shaky breath and returned to her task. The final wire took the most work. It was looped tightly behind the shepherd's back leg, buried in matted fur. It took 5 tries, 3 rests, and a whispered, "You're so brave," before it finally snapped. The shepherd jerked, then stilled. Blood oozed gently along his leg. Rosie dug into her lunch bag, found the folded napkin from lunch, and pressed it gently against the worst cut. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels. "All gone." The shepherd looked at his legs, then at her. Slowly he shifted weight to his front paws. His limbs wobbled. He tried to stand, managed 1 step, then collapsed again. This time onto his side, legs free, chest rising. Rosie looked at him with wide eyes. "You need a name," she whispered. The dog stared. "I think Max." His ears perked slightly. "Max," she repeated, more confidently. "I saved you, so now we're friends." Max licked her hand. Rosie giggled, despite everything. "Mom says friends look after each other." She looked at her hands, sticky with dirt and juice and something redder. Her dress was torn at the hem. The scissors hung loosely from her fingers. Somewhere nearby, a raccoon trilled. Rosie stood quickly, flashlight trembling in her grip. "You can't stay here," she said. "It's cold." Max looked up at her, blinking slowly. He didn't move. "I'll come back," she said. "But don't go away, okay? You have to stay." She stepped backward. "Promise." The German shepherd didn't bark, didn't cry, but his eyes stayed on her until the trees swallowed her silhouette. By the time Rosie crept back into her room, her knees were scraped, her fingers bruised, and the flashlight almost dead. She hid the scissors beneath her pillow and dropped the empty juice box in the toy bin. Her dress she shoved under the bed. Then she crawled into the blankets, heart still racing. She didn't sleep. She just listened. To the wind, to the creaks of the house, to her own promise echoing in her mind. "You have to stay." Morning arrived in Salem with a heavy hush. A pale sun filtered through thin clouds, brushing over rooftops and gardens soaked in dew. In the Carter home, warmth came from the smell of cinnamon pancakes and the hum of kitchen activity. But upstairs, in the smallest bedroom at the end of the hallway, the air was still, charged with a fragile secret. Rosie Carter lay curled in bed, her curly brown hair splayed across a pillow, patterned with stars. Her cheeks, flushed with sleep and dried tears, rested heavily on her small hands. Below her mattress, hidden behind dangling sheets and plush toys, lay Max, the German shepherd she had rescued in the dead of night. Max, 6 years old and battle-worn, slept curled on a folded towel Rosie had stolen from the linen closet. His black and tan fur, still sticky with old blood, twitched slightly with each shallow breath. His ears flicked now and then at the sound of distant footsteps, but otherwise he stayed silent, instinctively still. He had learned long ago that staying invisible was sometimes the only path to safety. Rosie's eyes blinked open at the sound of clinking plates downstairs. She lifted the edge of her blanket and peeked over the edge of the bed. The space beneath was dark, but a familiar shape moved gently. "Max?" she whispered, and her voice was like thread. There was a soft huff in reply. Rosie smiled and slid off the bed as carefully as she could. She grabbed a juice pouch and a granola bar from her dollhouse cabinet, her secret stash for days when snacks weren't allowed before lunch. Crawling quietly, she lifted the corner of the towel and peeked underneath. Max lifted his head. His eyes were glassy but alert. "Good morning," Rosie whispered. "I brought breakfast." She tore the wrapper slowly, broke the granola bar into smaller pieces, and pushed them toward him one by one. Max sniffed each, licked, and chewed slowly, his jaw stiff but working. Rosie held out the juice pouch like before, gently squeezing while Max lapped at the straw. He finished half and looked at her with what she was now sure was gratitude. "You're better," she said softly, rubbing behind his ear. "You smell less foresty." Downstairs, her mother's voice called out, "Rosie, come brush your hair, then breakfast." Sarah Carter, tall and pale, with tired blue eyes and a constantly tight blonde bun, was already setting the table. She moved like a woman with more lists in her head than hours in a day. A registered nurse who had returned to part-time shifts after years at home, she had grown more precise, more practical, and less patient with whimsy. Rosie crept to her door and cracked it open. She checked both directions before padding down the hall in her socks. The bathroom was empty. She brushed her teeth quickly and fluffed her curls with water. Her reflection stared back at her, dirty elbows, a smudge on her cheek, and eyes that held more than any 4-year-old should have to carry. At the table, her older brother Evan slouched with his face half buried in a bowl of cereal. He was 14, tall for his age, with unruly brown hair and a hoodie that hadn't seen the laundry in days. Evan had a sharp mind but a slow start in the mornings. He didn't look up as Rosie sat down. Sarah placed a plate in front of Rosie and sat across from her. "Did you sleep okay last night?" Rosie nodded. "I had dreams." "Nice ones?" Rosie hesitated. "He was there, the dog." Evan grunted. "The imaginary one?" Rosie stayed quiet. Sarah gave a soft laugh. "Rosie's dragon dog again?" "It's not a dragon," Rosie muttered. "Well," Sarah sighed, "after breakfast I want you to clean up your room. No more piles of toys under the bed." Rosie's fork paused midair. "Why?" "Because it's getting musty in there." Sarah wrinkled her nose. "And your towel drawer is mysteriously empty." Rosie blinked fast. "Maybe it's Evan." Evan looked up. "What?" "Nothing," Rosie blurted, stuffing pancake into her mouth. After breakfast, Rosie darted upstairs, her heart hammering. She tiptoed into her room and shut the door behind her. Max hadn't moved much, but his ears twitched at the sound. "They're suspicious," she whispered. "You have to be extra quiet." Max looked at her, and his tail gave one slow thump against the floor. She took that as a yes. She knelt down beside the bed, brushing his fur again. There was dirt still caught in the longer tufts behind his legs. She gently picked out a twig and laid it on the floor. "I'll clean you up more later," she whispered. "After cartoons." Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Max closed his eyes, and Rosie, knowing the secret was still safe, curled up on her rug with her coloring books, casting glances every few minutes to the dog hidden just beneath her feet. It was Sunday afternoon in Salem, Oregon. The air smelled faintly of cherry blossoms and damp pine needles after a brief drizzle. Sunlight broke through the clouds in narrow golden streaks, and the Carter house was unusually quiet. Rosie sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, her tongue sticking out in concentration, as she dragged a blue crayon across her sketch pad. Beneath the bed, Max lay still, his body tucked tightly under the shadows, ears perked to every sound upstairs and beyond. Max's wound had crusted over, but still pulsed with discomfort. The once vibrant black of his coat had dulled with grime, and scars long hidden beneath his fur now stood out in faint patches. But his eyes, amber and sharp, remained alert. There was history in them, the kind that didn't belong to normal dogs. Rosie leaned over her drawing, using a yellow crayon to color in a little badge on the chest of the man she had just drawn. The figure wore a police officer's hat and had no face, only an outline. She glanced toward the bed. Max's gaze met hers. "I saw him in your eyes," she whispered. "You remember him, don't you?" Max flinched at the sight of the picture. His ears folded back, and he let out a low whine, not of pain, but recognition. At that moment, the door creaked open. Evan stood there, tall and awkward in his usual pajama pants and mismatched socks. His brown hair was sticking up from a lazy nap, and his eyes narrowed immediately at the odd quiet of Rosie's room. "Rosie," he said slowly, stepping in, "why does it smell like wet dog in here?" Rosie froze. "No reason?" Evan lifted a brow and glanced around. His eyes swept the floor, the shelves, the scattered crayons, and stopped on the towel poking out from under her bed. "What is that?" "Don't!" Rosie shouted too late. Evan knelt and lifted the bedsheet. For a moment he didn't move. Max, half asleep, blinked slowly. Is that a dog? Evan's voice cracked between disbelief and panic. He's mine, Rosie cried. He's nice, I promise. Evan backed up against the wall, his arms raised. That thing's huge. He could bite your face off. No, he won't. He listens. Rosie turned to Max. Sit, Max. Max, slowly and stiffly, sat. See? She said, her voice pleading. Evan stared. Lay down. Max obeyed, gently lowering his body. Roll over. Max hesitated, then awkwardly tried, wincing. Rosie quickly dropped beside him. No, don't, Max. It's okay. You don't have to. Evan dropped to his knees, eyes still wide but not terrified now, just stunned. He understands commands? He's a good boy, Rosie whispered, rubbing Max's neck. He's my best friend. Evan sat silently for a long beat, then said, He's not just some dog. Rosie opened her sketch pad and turned it toward her brother. I drew this. He gets scared when I show him. Evan leaned forward. That's a police hat. That's a badge. I think he used to be with someone in uniform, but now he's scared of them. Evan scratched the back of his neck. That's not normal. Hang on. He stood up, jogged out, and came back with his tablet. Fingers flying, he searched until his screen flashed with an article headline. Canine officer missing after failed drug raid. Salem PD silent on details. He turned it so Rosie could see. The photo showed a German shepherd sitting next to a man in uniform. The dog's eyes, those amber eyes, were unmistakable. Rosie gasped. That's him! Max let out a soft bark, then whimpered and shifted deeper under the bed. Evan scrolled down. It says his name was Shadow. He disappeared during the raid. They thought he was killed. Rosie touched the screen. But he's here. Evan looked at her, really looked, not just the way an older brother half pays attention. This is big, Rosie. That's a police dog. A trained one. Maybe something bad happened, and that's why he ran. Rosie nodded solemnly. I think he's scared. I think someone hurt him. Evan sat back, breath heavy. If the cops find out you've got him, they might take him away. No, Rosie shouted. He's mine now. We don't know what happened to him yet, Evan replied, but we can find out. Rosie looked back at Max. He doesn't want to go back. I wouldn't either, Evan whispered, staring at the article again. Not after what this says. They sat together in silence, the sound of the wind brushing through the trees outside. Max rested his head on his paws and let out a low sigh. The secrets in his eyes weren't secrets anymore, not to them. The rain returned to Salem that Tuesday afternoon, tapping gently against the window panes like a secret wanting to be heard. Rosie lay on the living room rug, drawing again, crayons scattered like candy around her. Max, now slightly more alert but still limping, lay nearby, his chin resting on his paws, eyes flicking toward every sound beyond the door. Evan sat on the couch, flipping between news tabs on his tablet, his leg bouncing with restless energy. Their mother, Sarah Carter, was in the kitchen. A tall, lean woman in her late 30s, Sarah carried an elegance even in exhaustion. Her blonde hair was always pulled into a tight bun. Not for style, but because she said it, kept her thoughts from escaping. A former art teacher who now worked part-time at the local florist, Sarah had grown more distant over the past year, ever since their father left. She smiled less, and her patience had shrunk into something that snapped easily. But she loved her children with a quiet fierceness, particularly Rosie, who reminded her of herself before life demanded so much. The doorbell rang. Sarah, wiping her hands on a towel, called out, "Evan, can you get that?" Evan opened the door. Standing outside was a man in his early 40s, soaking from the rain. He had short black hair slicked against his scalp, and a trimmed beard peppered with gray. A faded military-style jacket clung to his tall frame, and a scar, long and thin, ran from his left temple to the top of his cheek. His posture was straight, almost too straight, and his eyes carried a fatigue that no sleep could cure. "Afternoon," the man said, voice low and even. "I'm looking for a dog." Evan's breath caught. "A dog?" The man nodded. "German Shepherd. Name's Maximus. He went missing last fall after an op went bad." Evan blinked, playing dumb. "We don't have a dog." Just then, Max let out a faint bark from the hallway, one of surprise, not warning. The man's expression didn't change. "So, you don't? Mind if I come in?" Before Evan could answer, Rosie appeared beside him. Her pink dress was now permanently stained at the knees, and her curls frizzed from the damp air. She looked up at the man without fear, only curiosity. "What's your name?" she asked. The man glanced down, surprised by her boldness. "Wyatt Blake." Max appeared behind Rosie, cautious, limping slightly. The moment he saw Wyatt, he stopped. His ears went flat. He let out a low, trembling whine and backed away, disappearing into the hallway, tail between his legs. Rosie turned. "Max? What's wrong?" Wyatt stepped inside slowly, dripping water on the mat. "He remembers me," he said quietly, "but not the way I'd like." Sarah entered, looking startled. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Wyatt handed her a card. It was simple. Wyatt Blake, former K-9 unit, Salem PD. And below, handwritten, "I'm not here to take him. I'm here to help." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You were his partner?" Wyatt looked past her, his voice thick with something close to regret. "We trained together. He saved my life more than once. Then he disappeared, and they said he was dead, but I never believed it." Evan watched Wyatt closely. "If you're not here to take him, then why are you really here?" Wyatt met his gaze. "Because someone betrayed us that night. Someone on the inside. And if Maximus ran, he saw something." From the hallway, Max let out a soft growl. Wyatt lowered his head. "I don't blame him for not trusting me." Rosie stepped forward, fists clenched. "He's not going anywhere." "I'm not here to make him," Wyatt replied. "But if he's going to heal, you might want to know what really happened." Before anyone could respond, Rosie spoke again. "He has nightmares." Everyone turned to her. "Last night," she continued, "he was whimpering in his sleep. I dreamed it too. He was in the woods, tied up. It was raining. There was a man with a badge. His face was blurry." Sarah looked at her daughter, troubled. "Rosie, that's just a dream." "No," Evan said, his voice low. "She draws what she sees, and she drew that before." Wyatt's brows knit together. "Let me guess. A badge, a dark hat, no face." Rosie nodded. Wyatt closed his eyes for a long moment. "That's him. The one who turned on us." Sarah stepped forward, shielding her daughter slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Max didn't run because he was scared," Wyatt replied. "He ran because he knew, and because someone tried to silence him." Silence filled the room like fog. Wyatt placed the card on the table. "I won't stay, but if he starts remembering or showing you something, call me. He trusts her more than anyone now. Maybe that's how he'll talk." He turned and walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused. "Tell him I still carry the old signal. He'll understand." Then he was gone, the rain swallowing him up. Back in her room, Rosie knelt beside the bed. Max peeked out, ears alert but no longer trembling. "Your real name is Maximus?" she whispered. Max blinked once. "You can still be Max," she said, smiling. "Max is enough." She reached under and touched his paw. He didn't pull away. The wind had shifted in Salem. What once was spring's gentle breath now carried a tense chill, as though the air itself sensed something wasn't right. The Carter house stood quietly on the corner of a sleepy street, its curtains drawn tighter, the front porch light left on longer. Inside, secrets ripened. Rosie sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, drawing again. A new page, a new memory, except this one didn't belong to her. The image forming under her crayon was of a tall man in a dark police uniform, his face scribbled over, eyes hollow. At his feet, Max, curled and cowering, tethered by a chain in the woods. The man's hat lay crooked on his head, badge number just barely visible. Wyatt Blake returned that afternoon, not by front door this time, but the side gate, as requested by Evan. Sarah wasn't home. She'd gone to pick up party supplies for a local event. And Evan didn't want their mother involved just yet, not until they were sure. Wyatt took the drawing Rosie handed him without a word. He looked older than the last visit, as though the weight of something heavy had been handed back to him. He sat on the edge of Rosie's bed, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "Where did you see this?" he asked. "In my dream," Rosie answered simply, fiddling with the hem of her pink dress. "And Max showed me with his eyes. When I held this picture up yesterday, he barked." Wyatt stared at the crooked badge number. 5127. His voice broke slightly. Evan leaned forward. "You recognize it?" Wyatt nodded slowly. "That's Officer Thomas Callan. We served in the same unit for a year before he got transferred to the DEA task force. A few months later, one of our raids failed. 2 officers got shot. One of them died. Maximus ran that night after seeing Callan whispering into a phone behind a patrol car. He placed the drawing gently on the bed. They never proved it. Callan had connections, and everything was swept under the rug. But Max, he knew. As if hearing his name, Max emerged from under the bed. The German Shepherd limped over to Rosie and nudged her shoulder softly. She smiled and hugged his neck. Wyatt's voice grew serious. If Callan's anywhere near here, it's not by accident. He's looking for Max. He knows the dog survived. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind pine trees, Evan took it upon himself to walk the neighborhood. He kept his hoodie up and phone in hand, pretending to text as he strolled down South River Road. Near the old park, he spotted a black sedan parked facing the Carter home. A tall man leaned against it, wearing a plain dark windbreaker. He was white, late 40s, built like someone used to command. A policeman's posture without the uniform. Evan hid behind a tree as the man raised his phone, not to call, but to take pictures. Snap. One of the house. Snap. One of the side yard. Then, slowly, he turned and walked up the sidewalk, knocking on the Wilkins front door 2 houses down. Mrs. Wilkins, a short white woman with curly gray hair and a sun hat, answered with a cautious smile. The man leaned close, showed her a picture of Max on his phone, and began talking. Evan couldn't hear, but he saw the woman shake her head and close the door soon after. The man walked back to his car and drove away without noticing the teen watching. Evan returned home pale. "He's out there," he whispered as Wyatt listened, "taking pictures of our house, asking about Max. I'm sure it was Callan." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Then he's moving fast, which means we have to be faster." Rosie, unaware of the darker whispers in the kitchen, sat on the carpet with Max and gently placed a plastic toy hat on his head, a child's version of a police cap. Max flinched. Rosie immediately took it off and kissed his nose. "It's okay. He's not real." Evening in Salem arrived like a quiet breath before the storm. A soft fog curled around the pine trees behind the Carter house, and the porch lights cast yellow halos into the dusk. Inside the kitchen, Wyatt Blake sat hunched over Sarah Carter's dining table, his fingers thumbing an old audio recorder. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp. He hadn't slept much. Neither had Evan, who paced by the window, one hand twitching at the curtain every time a car passed. Sarah stood nearby, arms crossed. She had always been the type of woman who managed everything. School lunches, birthday parties, and chaos. But today, her tall frame and sunken eyes betrayed a worry she couldn't decorate away. The lines on her face were deeper, her blonde hair still pinned in a neat bun, but with wisps escaping like nerves fraying. "Explain to me again," she said in a voice hovering between calm and disbelief, "why this man is coming to my front door." Wyatt looked up. "Because he doesn't know we're ready." From upstairs came the soft footsteps of Rosie. She wore her usual wrinkled pink dress, though now it was washed, and her curls were tied in a crooked ponytail by Evan earlier that afternoon. She was holding Max's leash, not because she had to, but because he wouldn't let her out of his sight. The 6-year-old German Shepherd limped beside her, still thin, still healing, but alert, more than alert, watchful. They all heard the knock at the door at once. It wasn't frantic, it was deliberate. Wyatt stood, so did Sarah. Evan quietly moved to stand beside Rosie at the stairs. Sarah opened the door. A tall white man in his late 40s, square-jawed, with short gray blonde hair, stood in a Salem Utilities jacket. A badge clipped to his chest read, "Security Compliance Division." He smiled tightly. "Good evening, ma'am. We've had reports of faulty systems in the area. I'm just checking the neighborhood's security units, especially near the backyards. Wouldn't want anyone's cameras offline during a break-in." Sarah blinked. "We haven't had any problems." "Still," he said, taking a small step forward, "I'd like to—" "Callan?" Wyatt's voice rang from behind her. It wasn't a question. Callan's eyes narrowed, but he smiled wider. "Sorry, do I know you?" "From Unit Delta 9, before you disappeared behind a desk." "I'm afraid you have the wrong—" Max's growl cut through the air. From behind Sarah, the dog lunged forward, teeth bared, planting himself between Rosie and the man in the doorway. Rosie didn't scream. She just gripped Max's collar and looked up at Callan. The quiet fury in her eyes belonged to someone far older than 4. "Looks like he remembers me," Callan said, stepping back. "I should leave." But before he could turn, Sheriff Daniel Rhodes emerged from the side path with 2 uniformed deputies. Daniel was a tall black man in his mid-50s, with deep lines carved around his eyes and a voice that rarely rose above a calm, commanding tone. "I think you should stay," he said firmly. Callan put up his hands, still trying to maintain the illusion. "I'm just a city employee." Wyatt stepped forward and pulled out the recorder. "No. You're the man who told an informant to leave the South Side gate unlocked. You're the voice that said, 'Make it look like an accident.' And Max here," he nodded at the dog still growling, "was there the night it went down." Daniel nodded toward one of the deputies, who stepped forward. "We verified the badge. It's fake. And that car out front? It's registered to a shell company that doesn't exist."
Still, Callan said nothing.
Then he looked down at Rosie. She hadn't moved. She hadn't blinked. And he did something no one expected. He reached toward her. Max exploded. In a flash of motion, the canine was up on all fours, snapping forward, stopping only inches before biting. His bark split the night, deep and furious. Rosie stayed steady, one hand on his neck, whispering, "Stay." And he did. Callan stumbled back into the arms of the deputies, whose cuffs clicked around his wrists in one practiced motion. "You're under arrest," Daniel said, "for obstruction, conspiracy, and endangering a federal agent." Wyatt finally exhaled. Rosie walked forward and gently touched Max's shoulder. The dog looked up at her. Then, slowly, he laid down. Inside the house, Sarah knelt in the foyer and opened her arms to Evan, who had gone pale from the adrenaline. She didn't speak. She just hugged him. Later that night, the family sat around the kitchen table. Not in silence, not in fear, but in a strange kind of peace. Max lay at their feet, chewing slowly on a new toy Sarah had found in the garage. Sarah set down a cup of hot cocoa in front of Rosie and ran her hand gently through the girl's curls. "I guess you really did find a hero in the woods?" "No, Mama," Rosie whispered. "He found me." Sunlight spilled generously across Salem's downtown square, scattering golden light over rows of folding chairs, banners fluttering gently in the late morning breeze. The scent of fresh-cut grass mingled with cotton candy and kettle corn, drifting from food stalls set up along the edge of the plaza. Today wasn't a holiday, at least not an official one, but Salem felt like it was celebrating something far deeper than tradition. Rosie Carter sat in the front row, swinging her small feet in shiny pink shoes that didn't quite reach the ground. Her pink dress was clean today, a soft satin with tiny embroidered daisies across the hem, and her messy blonde curls had been smoothed into a bouncy ponytail that shimmered in the sun. She held tightly to the leash of the dog sitting proudly at her side. Max, formerly known as Maximus, now retired from his previous life as a canine, sat like a statue beside her, chest out, ears alert. A new harness wrapped around his frame, not one of black tactical leather, but a soft blue vest marked "Community Therapy Dog, Do Not Distract." His amber eyes, once sharp with suspicion and pain, now radiated warmth and focus. Though a thin scar still ran across his side, he wore it like a badge of honor. Standing on the portable stage ahead, Sheriff Daniel Rhodes adjusted the microphone. His deep voice carried easily through the speakers, calm and composed as always. "Ladies and gentlemen of Salem," he began, nodding to the crowd gathered beneath the oak trees and flagpoles, "we are here today not just to honor courage, but to recognize clarity. Sometimes, in the noise of the world, it takes the smallest voice to hear what others miss." The crowd murmured in agreement. Sarah Carter stood beside her husband at the side, tall and composed in a slate blue dress, her tired eyes moist with quiet pride. She clutched Evan's shoulder. He now stood straighter, more protective than before, one hand resting near Rosie's chair. Sheriff Rhodes gestured toward Rosie. While adults debated, and while officers like myself hesitated, it was a 4-year-old girl who heard the cry in the woods and didn't ignore it. She didn't look away. She didn't say someone else will help. She helped. Rosie's cheeks flushed as a few claps rippled through the crowd. Then, a full wave of applause rose. Max let out a quiet, approving bark. She reached down and scratched behind his ear, whispering something only he could hear. Rhodes continued. "Max, once a canine dog lost in the system, now stands not in service of force, but in service of healing. And today, we announce a new initiative in his honor, and in hers." A tall white woman stepped up beside the sheriff. She was slender, with curly salt and pepper hair pinned back into a low bun, and a calm, deliberate grace to her movements. This was Dr. Claire Hensley, a trauma psychologist who had spent 15 years working with both veterans and abused children. Her voice was soft but clear as she took the mic. "We're launching a new program through the Salem Community Outreach and Youth Services Division," she said. "It's called Rosie's Shield." She paused, letting the name settle into the air. "It's a space where children, especially those who've experienced trauma, can connect with therapy-trained canines like Max. They'll learn how to understand animal emotions, how to rebuild trust, and how to heal. And just like Rosie showed us, they'll discover their own strength through kindness." The applause returned, this time louder. Reporters snapped photos. Max didn't flinch. He stayed by Rosie's side, still and strong. Later that afternoon, beneath the same oak trees, tables were lined with coloring books, stickers of police dogs, and informational pamphlets. A booth labeled "Meet Max" quickly drew a line of children. Rosie sat behind it like a celebrity, signing her name in crayon on little cards while Max lay beside her, letting strangers pet his head. Evan, watching nearby, wore a new shirt, no holes, no stains, and smiled every time Rosie giggled. Beside him, Wyatt Blake leaned against a tree, arms folded, his usual brooding expression softened by the sight. He hadn't shaved, and his brown stubble gave him a perpetual look of weariness, but his eyes betrayed relief. He wasn't part of the program officially, but Sheriff Rhodes had offered him a role mentoring future canine handlers, and this time Wyatt hadn't said no. Sarah approached Rosie, holding a juice box and a sun hat. "Honey, you've been out in the sun too long. Let's rest a bit." Rosie shook her head. "Not yet. Max is still working."
Sarah chuckled, crouching beside her daughter. "Well, maybe he needs a break too."
Max responded with a short woof, then rested his head gently on Rosie's knee. Behind them, a large banner waved in the breeze. It was printed with a photo, Rosie holding Max's face, nose to nose, both of them smiling in their own way. Beneath the photo were the words,
"Rosie's Shield, because every heart deserves a second chance."
As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting gold across the rooftops of Salem, a new chapter had begun, not just for a dog who had once been forgotten in the woods, but for an entire community. One that had been reminded, through the stubborn love of a little girl, that healing begins with listening. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes, they come in the quiet footsteps of a little girl, or the faithful eyes of a wounded dog who still believes in love. In Rosie's whisper and Max's bark, we're reminded that even in a broken world, God's grace still finds a way, through children, through animals, through the smallest acts of kindness. In your everyday life, never underestimate the power of listening, the strength of compassion, and the courage to care, even when no one else believes. Because it may be your voice, your step, or your heart that answers someone else's silent prayer. Let's take a moment to reflect on the blessings we often overlook. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below with amen if you believe in second chances, in the healing power of love, and in the quiet miracles God still performs around us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of faith, love, and the extraordinary bond between animals and people. May God bless you and everyone you love.